Good morning. Come on, this is being recorded for posterity. Good morning. All right, so everybody here needs to be really excited. Not to say anything against the other presenters at the conference, but this is the most exciting presentation you will see while you're here. Um, Mainly because, really think about what's happening here. This is a landscape scale scientific experiment, and that's moving across half of the North American continent. So, yeah, everybody should stand up and cheer and be excited. Whether you approve or disapprove of the beetle moving into your area, it's still an amazing thing to see. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about the beetle and the expansion, and then the panel that was convened, and then Matt is going to talk more about what went on at the panel discussion. So, of course, the beetle is just a form of biological control, one option for controlling tamarisk. It is not meant to eradicate tamarisk, but end up in an ecological stasis of sorts, wherein basically the biomass of beetles will equal the biomass of tamarisk in the long run. So I went through a fairly long and intensive process to gain approval for use as a biocontrol agent in the United States. This, of course, involved testing against other vegetation species to make sure that it wouldn't consume non-target species, and was then approved for limited release in 2001. In 2000, well, this is what it looks like. If you haven't seen it yet, you will. And these are just the eggs and larvae, as well as the adult. The adults disperse, the larvae do most of the damage. It looks like this at close range. So basically, in 2004, there were large releases on the Colorado River near Moab. And as the beetle began to spread, there came a need to do monitoring. So the Tamarisk Coalition worked with, I think I'm missing a slide here. There we go. Tamarisk Coalition worked with the Colorado Department of Ag's Palisade Insectary and UC Santa Barbara to develop protocols to monitor the beetle as it moved across the landscape. Originally, TC did a lot of this monitoring, hopping on rafts and floating on the Colorado and Green rivers as it moved. Now it has spread so far that obviously one small group of people can not look across all of North America. And so now I have almost 60 partners that provide data that we maintain to help land managers get an idea of when the beetle might be in their area and how they can incorporate it into their restoration planning. So the next series of photos or slides you'll see start in 2007 is when we began monitoring, and you will see years of expansion. In these particular slides, the red means larger populations, the yellow smaller, and then white is where the beetle is not yet there. So this is in 2007, 8, in 2009. You can see it's moving well up the main stem rivers and tributaries. 2010. 2011, it was introduced into the Arkansas Basin. And then this map shows the color change here is just years of expansion, so you can really get an idea of how they expanded across the landscape. This jump is not mean the beetles jumped to Texas that year. They had been introduced into Texas previously, but 2009 in 2012 was when we got data that went back to 2009 from Texas. So this is showing beetle expansion in Texas from that point. 2013, you can see that the beetle is moving up the Rio Grande and the Pecos, and also spreading out into Oklahoma and Kansas. But if you notice, let's go back to 2012. If you see here where it is, this is the northern Tamarisk beetle. There are 4 species of beetle. I'm not going to get into that because y'all need to go see James Tracy's chat about that. But this is the northern species, and it basically was there in 2012, 2013, pretty much the same spot. And this past year, again, just staying right there. There's been some more expansion this past year up the Rio Grande and all the way up to Pecos and out east of Oklahoma City in Oklahoma and in Kansas. This was really where the major population expansions were this year, or in these areas here. This is the larger Tamarisk beetle, and this is the subtropical beetle. So basically what's happened here is the beetle has reached a point where biologically it's reached a limit of what's critical day length. And again, not going to go too much into that. I'm sure James will touch on it. But these populations are basically stalled out in Arizona. It's as far south as they're going to move for the moment. They'll continue to evolve and move slowly, but the really quick expansion that we saw in the upper basin is kind of slowed for these guys. It's expected that populations will move in from the subtropical species and move into the Gila. But all of that expectation has people wondering what's going to happen here, where there are a lot of issues with not only endangered species like the willow flycatcher, but hydrologic conditions that may lead to other vegetation that might be more desirable, maybe not establishing as well as it does in some areas. So that led us to convening a expert panel of Tamarisk beetle folks from across different disciplines to really get an idea of what the future may look like for the lower Colorado River Basin. So the Tamarisk Coalition, with funding from Walton Family Foundation, had this panel basically 3 weeks ago, I guess, looking to bring experts together from different disciplines so that we're not just focusing on one aspect of the ecosystem, but really trying to look at all of it to come to consensus, or at least agree to disagree on certain issues if it came to that, and try to determine what the future of the lower Colorado looks like. So these are the invited panelists that were involved. Dan, who's here if you want to tackle him later and find out what happened. Oswell, who presented yesterday, Matt, Rebecca Manners, the geomorphologist position for us out of the University of Montana, Pat Sheffroth with USGS, and Anna Scher out of DU. So the panel went for a day and a half of discussion. It started with some presentations to kind of update all the panelists as to what was going on. So these were the presentations that were given by Dan, Matt, Anna, Gail Druce, who is kind of the expert on wildland fire and desert riparian ecosystems, and myself. These will be available on our website whenever I get done making this whole conference available on the website. So it'll be there eventually. And some of that was to help establish assumptions to frame the discussion so that the discussion didn't go down a bunch of rabbit holes and actually stayed on topic. So the first assumption is that diarrhea species of some sort will eventually get into the lower Colorado River Basin. The second one is that there's obviously the question of Tamarisk and water budget out there, and this panel was not convened to look at that, so we weren't going to go after that. That climate change is occurring, but nobody's exactly sure what or when or how things will happen, so kind of just assume it will happen, but set it aside. And then an assumption about what is an expectation of how land managers want to see the environment after the beetles there, or anytime really. And so looking at native assemblages of plants that can support desirable ecosystem functions. So that kind of set up questions that were developed that the panelists looked at. And on that, I'm going to hand it over to Matt.
Thanks, Ben. So what I'm going to briefly discuss is what we came up with as far as strategies and management actions that should be in place as the beetle is going to be part of this system, and how we're going to deal with it, and how we move forward. And so the system is complex, no matter what you look at, how you look at it. And this is just a conceptual model looking at the Southwest willow flycatcher and all the factors that are involved for that bird to successfully breed during one breeding season. And it ranges from stream flow, all the factors as far as the impacts as far as livestock grazing, and all habitat, the differences in habitat, and how energy, the level of productivity, heat stress that is on the birds. All these factors have huge effects on if that bird's actually going to successfully breed that year. And so this is just one species that we're talking about. And then you throw in the beetle. And how is that going to actually affect a lot of these species that are going to have to coexist with the Tamarisk leaf beetle? And there's long-term effects and there's short-term effects. And how we're going to manage these lands with the beetle in place is going to be a challenge. And so this panel was convened to really discuss all these factors, and eventually we'll produce a publication that will help managers deal with the fact that this beetle is going to really be a big part of our system. So one of the first questions, and I'm sorry for a lot of the wording, I didn't know how to shorten what we really went over, but one of the questions was, with the beetle as an integral part of the riparian ecosystem, what is the likely trajectory, ecological change in the Colorado River Basin, including the Delta, without management interventions? And so what are the short-term and the long-term impacts, 10, 20, 50 years down the road? And the beetles are expected, for one thing, are expected to spread throughout the entire Colorado River Basin. And that's, as Ben's map showed, that we've already seen that. And Tamarisk presence and dominance will likely decline dramatically as a result. In the short term, we've already started to see that. Monitoring data has shown that the decline of Tamarisk populations over large landscapes where the beetle exists is currently present are declining. How much will it decline in 10 years? How much will it decline in 20 years? These are the things that we need to address. But we're already seeing that decline in the short term. The expected effects of the Tamarisk decline on native plant species are dependent on a number of factors. The decline of the Tamarisk will undoubtedly free up resources for replacement vegetation. What is that replacement vegetation? Is it going to be native, or is it going to be more exotics? What plant species become established in the long run will depend on all kinds of things: the physical, hydrological, climate processes of the site, seed source availability, and the plant traits of the species that could colonize or expand. This is going to be a huge challenge for a lot of managers. Over time, the beetles should help to reduce wildfire threat and intensity by reducing highly flammable live tamarisk in the system. Gail Drews, who's been doing a lot of work on this as far as the effects on wildlife on tamarisk, this is going to change. In the short term, wildlife threat may be temporarily increased due to litter buildup. As we see, as far as the defoliation and then eventually mortality, there's going to be an increase of this wildfire threat. But as the fuel loads are reduced through tamarisk mortality, native plants should be better able to recover from fire, although it will depend on the hydrological regime and other site specifics. And this factor right here, this hydrological regime, has a lot to do with how these systems deal with the beetle and all the ramifications that occur from the beetle. Another question is, what are the implications that on aquatic and terrestrial animal species? How is wildlife going to deal with the beetle? And in the short term, we're already seeing a lot of these effects. As far as the impact of the beetle on wildlife species will depend on the particular response of the site and how successful native plants established after Tamarisk begins to decline. There are currently a high level of uncertainty about this, but we are seeing that the initial risk of many of the species have adapted that are like already adapted to Tamarisk. For instance, bird species defoliation is already seen that it opens up the canopy and can lead to higher rates of predation and brood parasitism. And also we've seen that monitoring data have shown decline of fledgling success of the southwest willow flycatcher, particularly on the Virgin River. And defoliation is definitely affecting the microclimate. So those are the short-term effects that we're already seeing. Birds are likely less risk. I mean, there's always going to be a risk and there's going to be a change, but the amphibians and reptiles are going to have a greater mobility that have less greater mobility and have shown adaptability where the susceptible alternative vegetation exists. So as far as southwest willow flycatcher, we've already seen that after 1 year of Tamarisk defoliation, they started to move into native vegetation sites, such as what's going on in the Virgin River. Heather Bateman has already shown that lizards have been shown a decline in abundance and activity on the Virgin River, where there's heavy defoliation and actually mortality happening. But little is known as far as the impacts of small mammals and including bats. And so we've started to already see short term, what are those long-term effects? And as far as, so the second question is where and when the desired outcome is being primarily achieved through biocontrol, what actions are needed to enhance this transition? And as the Tamarisk beetle moves into the lower Colorado River Basin, a number of underlying conditions, drivers need to be in place to support a desired transition toward a healthy native plant assemblage. And this is, so an assessment of the conditions should include the hydrological and geomorphic processes, soil salinity, extent of invasive and native plant communities, the presence of what threatened and endangered species are in the system. Also, what if the beetle is coming in, what kind of Tamarisk control should take place? As far as now, we already have the biocontrol. Should there be more mechanical and chemical control? But what are the results of that mechanical and chemical control? Is there going to be more active? These active methods are known to disturb soil and create ideal conditions for those secondary weeds. Are those the factors that we really have to consider as far as the beetle movement in, and are we going to need to do more of this kind of type of Tamarisk control? And in some cases, it might be desirable to follow Tamarisk with additional control measures to address the infestation of these secondary invasives, such as Russian olive. And the second question just continues, we need to establish native plant vegetation in proximity to T&E species to provide refuge for and serve as a source of the native seeds, such as what's going on the upper Gila River right now. We're in the process in the next couple of weeks to actually start restoration in that system before the beetle actually gets into the Gila River. The Gila the beetle is absent in the Gila right now, and we're anticipating it to move into that area in the next 2 or 3 years. Right now, we're in the process of doing restoration before the beetle comes in. In basins or reaches without significant infrastructure risk, management to promote channel destabilization could be considered to jumpstart the restoration process. And selective and controlled burns to reduce Tamarisk biomass in advance of the beetle. And third question is, so we have all these multi-species conservation plans that are happening. How are these conservation plans going to address the beetle? And right now they're not addressing it, such as what's going on in the multi-species conservation plan of the Lower Colorado. They really haven't addressed how they're going to control the beetle once it moves into the system. How are they going to, a lot of that system is really dependent on tamarisk. A lot of those species are already dependent on tamarisk. Are they going to enhance somehow for tamarisk to stay in that system? The Salt River project also might be affected by, in respect to the mitigation, where there is a requirement to maintain current conditions on predominantly tamarisk-dominated sites. How is that going to change once the beetle comes in? And the fifth question was really, what research needs to be conducted? And these were just a few of the factors that we really looked at as far as beetle genetics and beetle effects on tamarisk, tamarisk and native species, suggestions that included the effects on native species if tamarisk is removed, geomorphological and hydrological questions, wildlife impacts, what is defoliation effect on the migration habits, what is a defoliation effect on microclimate, and then fire regimes, development of wildfire risk assessment models, and same with wildlife. That was a big question that we wanted to look at, is modeling the impacts on the species of concern. And finally, so the panel really emphasized, and this is going to be a publication that is going to be out in the next, hopefully, 6 months. We'll probably discuss the results of this next year. And so this is all preliminary kind of information right now, and how we're going to address this. But the panel emphasizes the importance of catchment-specific planning. Also, the importance of inventory and monitoring and informed management is going to be key, and not only to assess the baseline conditions ahead of the beetle encroachment, but as an ongoing tool to track the effects of the beetle as it moves through the lower basin. Currently, there are a few programs with Arizona Water Protection Fund that there's been baseline inventory of what's happening as far as what's there vegetation-wise, and continue these long-term plant and vegetation plots to see what those changes are going to occur. And adaptive management practices will also be essential to help meet these resource management objectives. These adaptive management plans should be used to help guide activities that enhance success. And this panel is developing a framework to assist. The main deal with this, the main emphasis of this panel was to develop a framework to assist managers in selecting appropriate management strategies and identify future research needs to further inform restoration approaches and management decisions. And so there will be information on the website through the Tamarisk Coalition on our progress on this publication, and the availability to everyone that's going to be interested as far as management of their lands. Thank you.